Dr. Nathan Caldwell was the epitome of success. At just 42 years old, he had carved out a reputation as one of New Haven General Hospital's most accomplished surgeons. Known for his precision in the operating room and his charming demeanor outside of it, Caldwell's rise through the ranks of the medical field seemed almost predestined. Patients adored him, colleagues admired him, and administrators leaned on him to uphold the hospital's sterling reputation. Nathan's journey to success began in a small Midwestern town, where his natural intelligence and unwavering determination set him apart. The son of a factory worker and a schoolteacher, he excelled in school, earning a full scholarship to a prestigious university. After graduating at the top of his class in medical school, he completed his residency at one of the nation's leading hospitals, where his exceptional skills quickly became evident. By the time Nathan arrived at New Haven General, he was a rising star in the world of medicine. His specialty was in complex vascular surgeries, and his patient survival rates were among the highest in the region. Surgeons who observed him in action often described his technique as surgical artistry. To Nathan, each procedure was a puzzle, and he approached it with both precision and creativity. Outside of the operating room, Nathan's charisma was undeniable. He had the kind of magnetic personality that drew people in. A confident smile, an easy laugh, and the ability to make anyone feel at ease. He was a frequent guest at charity galas, hospital fundraisers, and community events, where his charm and eloquence made him a favorite among donors and board members. But behind the polished exterior and professional accolades, there were whispers. Some staff members noted that Nathan's charm often crossed into arrogance, and his confidence sometimes veered into recklessness. Others observed his penchant for perfectionism, which could border on obsessive. And then there were the rumors, murmurs of affairs, heated arguments with colleagues, and a temper that occasionally flared behind closed doors. Despite these whispers, Nathan remained untouchable. His undeniable talent and the life-saving procedures he performed shielded him from scrutiny. Hospital administrators were quick to dismiss any concerns, unwilling to risk losing their golden boy. To the public, Nathan Caldwell was a hero. But not everyone at New Haven General shared the public's adoration. Charlotte Hayes moved through the corridors of New Haven General Hospital like a shadow. Her uniform, a plain green smock and sensible shoes, allowed her to blend seamlessly into the background. To most, she was invisible, a silent presence tasked with the endless cycle of cleaning and sanitizing the hospital's bustling facilities. But Charlotte saw everything. The janitorial staff at New Haven General worked tirelessly to maintain the hospital's pristine image, yet their efforts were often taken for granted. The same polished floors that surgeons hurried across without a second thought were scrubbed by hands like Charlotte's. The gleaming glass windows, the spotless restrooms, and the sanitized operating rooms, all were a testament to her labor. She worked the night shift, a time when the hospital grew quieter, and her presence became even less noticeable. For Charlotte, the night shift was both a blessing and a curse. It provided solitude and an escape from the probing eyes of her coworkers, but it also left her alone with her thoughts. Charlotte's journey to New Haven General had been anything but easy. Born into a working-class family, she learned early on that life rarely afforded second chances. Her parents, both factory workers, instilled in her the importance of hard work and resilience, but opportunities for upward mobility were scarce. She dropped out of high school to help support her family, taking on a series of menial jobs that paid little but demanded much. When she landed a job as a janitor at New Haven General, it felt like a small victory. The pay was steady, the benefits decent, and the hospital's union provided a layer of job security she hadn't experienced before. But over time, the monotony of the work and the lack of recognition wore on her. Charlotte had a routine. She arrived at the hospital as the day shift wound down, clocked in, and began her rounds. She cleaned every corner of the facility, from the waiting rooms to the operating theaters. The latter was her least favorite. The harsh fluorescent lights and the lingering smell of antiseptic reminded her of the hospital stays that had marked the darkest periods of her life. But Charlotte's work also gave her a unique vantage point. She observed the hospital's inner workings in ways most people didn't. She saw the nurses who stayed late to comfort grieving families, the exhausted interns running on little sleep, and the surgeons who carried an air of invincibility, as though their white coats made them immune to human frailty. It was in this capacity, as an unseen observer, that Charlotte first noticed Dr. Nathan Caldwell. Charlotte's initial impressions of Nathan were no different from anyone else's. He was charismatic, self-assured, and undeniably skilled. Watching him move through the hospital with an air of confidence, she understood why people gravitated toward him. But as the months turned into years, Charlotte began to notice the cracks in Nathan's polished exterior. While cleaning the doctor's lounge, she overheard snippets of conversations, complaints about Nathan's arrogance, rumors of his flirtations with younger nurses, and whispers of mistakes covered up by his reputation. She watched as he charmed his way out of accountability, leaving others to clean up the mess. For most people, these observations would have been nothing more than workplace gossip. But for Charlotte, they struck a deeper nerve. She saw in Nathan a reflection of all the people who had looked down on her throughout her life, those who used their privilege to get ahead, often at the expense of others. And then there were the moments that directly involved her. Nathan barely acknowledged Charlotte's presence, treating her like a piece of the hospital's furniture rather than a human being. On more than one occasion, she had cleaned up after his hasty exits, finding bloodied gloves discarded carelessly on countertops or coffee spills left in his wake. Once, when she asked him to move aside so she could mop the floor, he didn't even look up from his phone before muttering, "Just hurry up." But it wasn't just his behavior that unsettled her. There was something else, something deeper, a sense of familiarity that she couldn't quite place. Charlotte began to pay closer attention to Nathan, piecing together fragments of his life from overheard conversations, news articles, and the little details she gleaned from cleaning his office. She learned about his prestigious career, his wealthy upbringing, and the accolades that seemed to follow him wherever he went. And then one night, while cleaning an old storage room tucked away in the hospital's basement, Charlotte stumbled upon something that changed everything. Amidst a pile of outdated medical records and forgotten equipment, Charlotte found a folder bearing Nathan Caldwell's name. The contents were cryptic: a few faded photographs, a birth certificate, and a letter written in shaky handwriting. At first glance, it seemed like a harmless collection of personal items, perhaps misplaced by accident. But as Charlotte sifted through the documents, a chilling realization began to take shape. Nathan Caldwell was not the man he claimed to be. Charlotte's heart raced as she tried to make sense of what she had found. The details were fragmented, but one thing was clear. Nathan had a connection to her past, one that he had gone to great lengths to hide. For days, Charlotte wrestled with what to do. She wanted to confront Nathan, to demand answers, but fear held her back. Nathan was powerful, well-connected, and respected. She was a janitor, an unseen worker with no authority and no credibility. But the secret she had uncovered was too big to ignore. And as the weight of it pressed down on her, Charlotte realized that her life would never be the same. The quiet janitor who had spent years cleaning up after others had finally uncovered a mess she couldn't sweep away. And as the shadows of New Haven General grew darker, the stage was set for a confrontation that would shatter lives and expose the hospital's deepest secrets. Charlotte Hayes couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled over her since discovering the mysterious documents tied to Dr. Nathan Caldwell. She had always prided herself on staying in the background, observing but never interfering. Yet this revelation had forced her into uncharted territory. The folder she found in the hospital's basement wasn't just a random collection of items. It was a window into a secret Nathan had been hiding, one that seemed to connect their lives in ways she couldn't have anticipated. In the days following her discovery, Charlotte became consumed with piecing together the puzzle. She spent her breaks in the hospital library, scouring old archives for information about Nathan's past. Late at night, in the solitude of her small apartment, she sifted through the contents of the folder, reading and rereading every detail. One item stood out: a faded photograph of a young boy standing beside an older woman in a nurse's uniform. On the back, written in neat cursive, were the words, "Nathan, age 6, with mom." The boy's face was unmistakably Nathan's, but the woman looked eerily familiar to Charlotte. She couldn't shake the feeling that she had seen her before, not in passing, but as a vivid figure from her own life. The more Charlotte dug into Nathan's past, the more questions she uncovered. Public records revealed that Nathan Caldwell had been born in a small Midwestern town, but his family history was shrouded in inconsistencies. His mother, Evelyn Caldwell, was listed as a nurse who had worked at several hospitals before her untimely death when Nathan was a teenager. But there were gaps in the timeline, discrepancies that didn't add up. Charlotte's memories from her own childhood began to surface, memories she had buried deep, hoping to forget. Her mother, a nurse who worked long hours at a rural hospital, had often brought her along on shifts when childcare was unavailable. As a child, Charlotte had spent countless hours in break rooms and waiting areas, overhearing fragments of adult conversations and observing the quiet dramas of hospital life. It was during one of those long evenings that Charlotte had first met Evelyn Caldwell. At the time, Evelyn was a new nurse who had quickly bonded with Charlotte's mother. The two women shared a camaraderie that extended beyond their shifts, often spending weekends together with their children in tow. Charlotte vividly remembered playing with a young boy named Nathan while their mothers chatted over coffee. The realization hit Charlotte like a freight train. Dr. Nathan Caldwell, the celebrated surgeon who barely acknowledged her existence, was the same boy she had once played hide-and-seek with in hospital hallways. But why had their paths diverged so drastically? What had driven him to erase his past and reinvent himself? The more Charlotte reflected, the more troubling details came to light. She remembered whispers between their mothers, hushed conversations about ethical dilemmas and hospital scandals. Her mother had once mentioned that Evelyn was in trouble, something about falsified records and a missing patient file. Shortly afterward, Evelyn had left town abruptly, taking Nathan with her. Could the secret Charlotte had uncovered be related to those long-forgotten events? Was Nathan's meteoric rise in the medical field built on a foundation of lies? Charlotte felt a surge of anger. For years, she had been treated as invisible, a mere cog in the hospital's machinery, while Nathan had basked in accolades and privilege. Now, she held a piece of his carefully constructed puzzle, and the power dynamic between them had shifted, if only slightly. But Nathan Caldwell wasn't a man who let his guard down easily. If Charlotte wanted answers, she would have to tread carefully. Charlotte's opportunity came one late evening as she cleaned the hallway outside Nathan's office. Through the partially open door, she heard him speaking on the phone, his voice sharp and urgent. "I don't care what it takes," he said, his tone laced with frustration. "This needs to disappear. If anyone finds out, it's over for me." Charlotte froze, her heart pounding. She couldn't make out the specifics of the conversation, but the implication was clear. Nathan was hiding something big, and it was unraveling. When the call ended, Charlotte mustered her courage and knocked on the door. "Come in," Nathan called, sounding distracted. Charlotte stepped inside, clutching her cleaning supplies as a prop. "Sorry to bother you, Dr. Caldwell. I just need to empty the trash." Nathan barely looked up from his desk. "Fine, just be quick." As Charlotte moved around the room, her eyes darted to the papers on his desk. Among them was a familiar document, a copy of the same photograph she had found in the basement folder. Her pulse quickened. Before she could stop herself, she said, "You were close with your mom, weren't you?" Nathan's head snapped up, his eyes narrowing. "What did you say?" Charlotte hesitated, her fingers tightening around the trash bag. "Your mom, Evelyn Caldwell. She was a nurse, right?" For a moment, Nathan looked stunned, but the expression quickly morphed into something colder. "How do you know that?" Charlotte took a step back, her voice trembling but resolute. "I remember her, and I remember you. We knew each other when we were kids. Our moms worked together." Nathan stood, his imposing figure casting a shadow across the room. "You're mistaken," he said curtly. "I don't know what you're talking about," but the flicker of panic in his eyes betrayed him. Charlotte decided to push further. "I found something in the basement, a folder with your name on it. It looks like you've been hiding something, Dr. Caldwell. Something big." Nathan's face hardened. You shouldn't have done that. For the first time in her life, Charlotte felt the full weight of Nathan's authority, his presence both intimidating and dangerous. But she also saw something else, fear. As the silence stretched between them, Charlotte realized that she had crossed a line. There was no turning back now. The confrontation marked the beginning of a dangerous game of cat and mouse. Nathan, desperate to protect his secret, began to monitor Charlotte's movements, while Charlotte dug deeper into the hospital's archives, determined to uncover the truth. Their once separate worlds had collided, and the fallout was inevitable. In the pristine halls of New Haven General, a deadly storm was brewing, one that would end in bloodshed and expose the darkest corners of the hospital's history. The days following Charlotte's confrontation with Dr. Nathan Caldwell were fraught with tension. What had once been a predictable routine, cleaning, sanitizing, and slipping unnoticed through the hospital's labyrinthine corridors, had become a minefield. Charlotte could feel Nathan's presence everywhere, as though his shadow followed her every move. She couldn't tell whether it was paranoia or reality, but things began to shift. Tasks she had completed meticulously for years were suddenly called into question. Her supervisor, who had always praised her work, started issuing curt reprimands for minor mistakes. Key cards that once granted her access to certain storage areas mysteriously stopped working. Her colleagues, though polite, seemed wary, as though they had been warned to keep their distance. Charlotte knew what was happening. Nathan was using his influence to isolate her, to remind her of her place in the hospital's hierarchy. But rather than deter her, it only fueled her determination. She wasn't just a janitor anymore. She was a keeper of secrets, and Nathan was afraid of what she might reveal. Rumors began to circulate among the staff. Whispers of an incident involving Dr. Caldwell spread like wildfire, though no one could pinpoint exactly what had happened. Some speculated about a lawsuit, while others suggested a professional scandal. Nathan, however, maintained his usual composed demeanor, dismissing the gossip with a practiced smile. But behind closed doors, Nathan was unraveling. His office, once a place of calm efficiency, had become a fortress. He spent hours poring over files, making frantic phone calls, and meeting with hospital administrators. Charlotte's discovery had rattled him, and though he had no proof of what she planned to do, the uncertainty gnawed at him. Nathan's fear turned to desperation, and desperation, in turn, bred recklessness. One night, Charlotte returned to the hospital's basement archives. She had been avoiding the area since finding the folder, but she knew there were more pieces to the puzzle. Equipped with a flashlight and a growing sense of resolve, she navigated the dimly lit storage room, her heart pounding with anticipation. She found what she was looking for in a dusty filing cabinet labeled 1975 to 1985. Internal Investigations. Inside was a file marked E. Caldwell. Charlotte's hands trembled as she opened it. The contents confirmed her worst suspicions. Evelyn Caldwell had been implicated in a series of medical ethics violations during her time at a different hospital, falsified patient records, unauthorized procedures, and a suspicious death that had been quietly ruled as a heart attack. The investigation had been swept under the rug when Evelyn abruptly resigned and disappeared from the area. But one document stood out among the rest. A signed statement from Charlotte's own mother, who had worked alongside Evelyn. It detailed her mother's knowledge of the incidents and her attempts to report them, only to be silenced by hospital administrators. Charlotte's blood ran cold. Her mother's career, and, by extension, her family's stability, had been jeopardized by Evelyn's actions. Nathan, though just a child at the time, had been swept along in his mother's wake, a living reminder of the chaos she had caused. Armed with this new information, Charlotte decided to confront Nathan again. But this time, she wouldn't wait for him to dismiss her. She would force him to listen. She found him in the doctor's lounge late one evening, nursing a glass of scotch and staring at a framed photo of the hospital board. He looked up when she entered, his expression unreadable. "We need to talk," Charlotte said, her voice steady. Nathan sighed, setting his glass down. "You're persistent. I'll give you that." Charlotte placed the file on the table between them. "I know what your mother did. And I know how far you've gone to keep it buried. Nathan's jaw tightened. You don't know anything, he said coldly. I know enough, Charlotte shot back. I know about the investigation. I know about my mother's statement. And I know that you've been living a lie ever since. Nathan stood, his towering figure casting a shadow over her. You think you're in control here? You're nothing. A janitor. No one will believe you over me. But Charlotte didn't flinch. She met his gaze, her eyes blazing with defiance. You're scared, Nathan. I can see it. You've spent your whole life running from the truth. And now it's caught up to you. For a moment, the tension in the room was palpable. Then, Nathan's expression shifted, a flicker of something darker crossing his face. You don't know what you're getting yourself into, he said, his voice low and menacing. Walk away, Charlotte. While you still can. Charlotte left the lounge with a sinking feeling in her stomach. Nathan's threat hung heavy in the air, but it only solidified her resolve. She couldn't walk away, not now, not when she was so close to the truth. But Nathan wasn't going to let her win. The next day, Charlotte received a summons to the hospital administrator's office. There, she was met with accusations of misconduct, claims that she had accessed restricted areas and tampered with hospital property. Though she denied the allegations, it was clear that Nathan's influence had reached the upper echelons of the hospital's leadership. Charlotte was suspended pending an investigation. As she packed her belongings, a mix of anger and despair coursed through her. She had risked everything to expose Nathan's secrets, and now she was being silenced, just as her mother had been decades earlier. But Charlotte wasn't done yet. If the hospital wouldn't hear her, she would take her story elsewhere. The breaking point had been reached, and there was no turning back. In the battle between a surgeon who lived in the spotlight and a janitor who dwelled in the shadows, the truth was a weapon, and it was about to come to light. Charlotte Hayes' suspension from New Haven General Hospital marked a turning point. 4 years, she had been a silent observer, blending into the fabric of the hospital's day-to-day operations. But now, she found herself at the center of a tangled web of lies, secrets, and corruption. Nathan Caldwell's influence had forced her out of her job, but it hadn't silenced her. Charlotte knew she couldn't fight this battle alone. With her position stripped away and her access to the hospital revoked, she turned to the one resource that Nathan couldn't control: the truth. Charlotte began by contacting a local investigative journalist, Amelia Rivera, who had made a name for herself exposing corruption in powerful institutions. Charlotte had read Amelia's work before, articles about corporate fraud, political scandals, and even a piece on malpractice in another regional hospital. If anyone could help her shine a light on Nathan Caldwell's secrets, it was Amelia. Their meeting took place in a quiet coffee shop on the outskirts of town. Charlotte arrived early, clutching the folder she had found in the hospital basement, along with the additional documents she had uncovered. Amelia, a sharp-eyed woman in her late 30s, listened intently as Charlotte recounted her story. She asked pointed questions, her pen flying across a notebook as she jotted down every detail. You're telling me, Amelia said, leaning back in her chair, that Dr. Nathan Caldwell, the hospital's golden boy, is connected to a cover-up involving his mother's unethical practices decades ago? Yes, Charlotte replied, and he's gone to great lengths to keep it buried. He had me suspended to shut me up, but I'm not going to let him win. Amelia nodded slowly. If what you're saying is true, this could be huge. But I'll need evidence, hard evidence, to back up these claims. Do you have anything concrete? Charlotte slid the folder across the table. It's all in here. Everything I've found so far. Amelia opened the folder and began sifting through its contents. As she read, her expression shifted from curiosity to astonishment. This is damning, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. If this checks out, it could destroy him. Over the next few weeks, Charlotte and Amelia worked together to build their case. Amelia used her investigative skills to dig into Nathan's past, uncovering records that Charlotte hadn't been able to access. Meanwhile, Charlotte tracked down former hospital employees who might have known Evelyn Caldwell or remembered the investigation into her misconduct. The deeper they dug, the more troubling the picture became. Evelyn's actions had left a trail of destruction in their wake. Patients whose lives had been irreparably damaged, colleagues whose careers had been ruined, and administrators who had looked the other way to protect their reputations. One name kept appearing in their research: Dr. Thomas Henley, a retired surgeon who had worked alongside Evelyn at the hospital where the alleged violations occurred. Charlotte and Amelia decided to track him down, hoping he could provide first-hand insight into what had happened all those years ago. Dr. Henley was living in a modest home in a quiet suburban neighborhood. When Charlotte and Amelia arrived at his doorstep, he seemed surprised to see them but invited them inside after they explained their purpose. "I haven't thought about Evelyn Caldwell in years," he said, settling into a worn armchair. "But I remember her well. She was brilliant, one of the best nurses I ever worked with. But she had a reckless side, too. She cut corners, took risks. It caught up with her eventually." "What happened?" Amelia asked, her voice steady but insistent. Henley sighed, running a hand through his thinning hair. "There was a patient, a young woman, who came in for a routine procedure. Something went wrong during surgery. Evelyn falsified the records to make it look like it was a pre-existing condition, but it wasn't. The patient died, and her family never got the truth. Did anyone try to hold her accountable?" Charlotte asked, her hands gripping the edge of her chair. "I did," Henley admitted. "I filed a report with the hospital board. But Evelyn had friends in high places. They buried the investigation and let her resign quietly. I left the hospital not long after. I couldn't stand to be part of a system that protected people like her." Charlotte felt a surge of anger and sadness. Evelyn's actions had not only destroyed lives but had also allowed her son, Nathan, to rise to prominence on a foundation of lies. "Would you be willing to go on the record about this?" Amelia asked. Henley hesitated. "It's been decades. I don't know if my word carries any weight anymore." "It does," Amelia assured him. "You're a credible witness, and your testimony could be the key to exposing the truth." After a long pause, Henley nodded. "I'll do it. If it means holding Nathan Caldwell accountable, I'll do it." As Charlotte and Amelia closed in on the truth, Nathan Caldwell's behavior grew increasingly erratic. Hospital staff noticed his temper flaring more often, and his once charming demeanor began to crack. He became paranoid, convinced that someone was watching him. Nathan's paranoia wasn't unfounded. Amelia's investigation had begun to attract attention, and whispers of a potential exposé were circulating among the hospital's upper ranks. Nathan, realizing that his carefully constructed life was in jeopardy, took drastic measures. He called an emergency meeting with the hospital board, presenting himself as the victim of a smear campaign. "Someone is trying to ruin me," he told them. "I've dedicated my life to this hospital, and now I'm being targeted by a disgruntled former employee." But the board members, while sympathetic, were not as easily swayed as they once had been. The evidence Amelia had uncovered was beginning to surface, and questions about Nathan's past were growing louder. The investigation was reaching a boiling point. Charlotte and Amelia had gathered enough evidence to expose Nathan's secrets, but they knew the fight wasn't over. Nathan still had powerful allies and the resources to mount a counterattack. As the days ticked by, tensions at New Haven General reached an all-time high. The hospital was no longer just a place of healing. It had become a battleground for truth and justice. Charlotte, once an unseen worker in the hospital's shadows, was now at the forefront of a fight that could bring down one of its most revered figures. The breaking point had passed, and there was no turning back. The trial of Dr. Nathan Caldwell was a spectacle that captivated the nation. What began as whispers of a scandal within the halls of New Haven General had erupted into a full-blown media frenzy. Journalists, former patients, medical professionals, and curious onlookers gathered outside the courthouse daily, eager to witness the downfall of a man once heralded as a prodigy in the medical field. Charlotte Hayes, the janitor-turned-whistleblower, was at the center of it all. She had once been invisible, but now, her courage in exposing the truth had made her the unlikely hero of a case that exposed corruption, greed, and a decades-long cover-up. Nathan Caldwell faced an array of charges, ranging from falsifying medical records to obstruction of justice. The prosecution built its case on the foundation laid by Charlotte's discoveries, with journalist Amelia Rivera's relentless investigation adding even more weight to the evidence. Central to the case were the allegations tied to Nathan's mother, Evelyn Caldwell. Though she had passed away years earlier, her actions during her tenure as a nurse were pivotal in shaping Nathan's rise to power. The prosecution argued that Nathan had knowingly benefited from his mother's unethical practices and had actively worked to suppress the truth once it began to resurface. Dr. Thomas Henley's testimony proved crucial. On the stand, he recounted in chilling detail the events that had unfolded decades earlier. The falsified records, the silenced complaints, and the death of a patient that had been covered up to protect Evelyn's career. Evelyn Caldwell's actions were unethical and dangerous, Henley told the court. But what's worse is that her son, Dr. Nathan Caldwell, has spent his entire career ensuring that her legacy remains untarnished. At the expense of the truth, Nathan's defense team, comprised of some of the most expensive lawyers in the country, sought to discredit the prosecution's case. They painted Nathan as a victim of circumstance, a man unfairly targeted for his mother's mistakes. Dr. Caldwell is a man who has dedicated his life to saving others, the lead defense attorney argued in opening statements. He is not on trial for his own actions but for the actions of a woman who can no longer defend herself. The defense also attacked Charlotte Hayes' credibility, emphasizing her role as a janitor and suggesting that she lacked the expertise to understand the documents she had uncovered. She is not a medical professional, the attorney said. She is a disgruntled former employee with a vendetta against Dr. Caldwell, but the jury seemed unmoved by these tactics. Charlotte's unwavering testimony, coupled with the mountain of evidence she and Amelia had uncovered, painted a damning picture of Nathan's role in perpetuating his mother's deceit. When Charlotte took the stand, the courtroom fell silent. Dressed simply and with her hands folded tightly in her lap, she looked out at the sea of faces, many of them unfamiliar, and felt a surge of anxiety. But as she began to speak, her voice steady and resolute, she told her story with the same determination that had carried her through the investigation. She described the folder she had found, the contents that had unraveled Nathan's carefully constructed facade, and the threats she had faced after confronting him. "I didn't want to be here," she admitted. "I didn't set out to ruin anyone's life. But when I saw what Nathan was hiding, when I realized how many people had been hurt by the lies, I couldn't stay silent." The defense tried to rattle her during cross-examination, questioning her motives and suggesting that she had acted out of spite. But Charlotte held her ground. "I didn't expose the truth for revenge," she said, her voice rising. "I did it because it was the right thing to do. Because the patients who suffered because of Nathan and his mother deserve justice." After weeks of testimony, closing arguments, and deliberation, the jury reached a verdict. The courtroom was packed as the forepersons stood to deliver the decision. On the charge of falsifying medical records, we find the defendant, Dr. Nathan Caldwell, guilty. On the charge of obstruction of justice, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of conspiracy to cover up unethical practices, we find the defendant guilty. Nathan sat motionless as the verdict was read, his face a mask of stoic disbelief. The courtroom erupted into murmurs, the weight of the moment settling over everyone present. For Charlotte, the verdict was a vindication, not just of her actions but of the years she had spent being overlooked and underestimated. She had proven that even the most invisible among us could hold the powerful accountable. Nathan Caldwell was sentenced to several years in prison, his medical license permanently revoked. His fall from grace sent shockwaves through the medical community, prompting a wave of internal reviews and reforms at hospitals across the country. New Haven General, tarnished by the scandal, issued a public apology and launched an independent investigation into its practices. Several high-ranking administrators resigned in the wake of the trial, and new policies were implemented to ensure greater transparency and accountability. As for Charlotte, life didn't return to normal, but it did change for the better. She became a vocal advocate for whistleblower protections and patient rights, using her newfound platform to speak out against corruption in healthcare. Though she never returned to her job at New Haven General, She found fulfillment in her role as a truth-teller and a force for change. In the end, the trial wasn't just about Nathan Caldwell's guilt or innocence. It was about the power of ordinary people to stand up to injustice and demand accountability. Charlotte Hayes may have started as an unseen worker, but she emerged as a hero, proving that sometimes the most powerful voices come from the least expected places.